Do I even need to explain this one? You've all heard of this, right? Basically, every art channel has done it before. Yeah? Okay, moving on then. Hi there, I'm Cavitato, the caffeinated potato, and I did the 10 Artstyles challenge. Mark that off the art channel bingo card. I don't have a bingo card. Should I start one? Art channel milestones bingo. That could be fun actually. But back on topic. I've been drawing for basically half my life, and yet I've never done this challenge before. I've wanted to, of course, but I just never did. I like sticking to familiar territory, and don't typically like challenging myself much. But I'm preparing to make a webcomic, which is an immensely challenging endeavor. So I better get used to pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And what better way to encourage myself to break out of that comfort zone than using this challenge to further show off my characters, or at least one of them. I started, like all these challenges tend to, with my own style to act as a baseline. Though, it is worth noting that I didn't actually include my own style in the list of the 10 styles. I don't know, drawing in my own style doesn't feel all that special. Not that I don't like my own style, I do. It's just so normal to me, you know? But I still wanted to include it for comparison's sake, so consider this as a bonus 11th style. It worked out well too, because having 10 other styles meant that I could have a perfectly even split between styles of shows that have impacted me at some point in my life, and other art channels that have been an inspiration to me. Now, the character I chose to draw was Aurora, the main character of my work-in-progress webcomic, Undying Bonds. I chose her specifically because 1, main character, and 2, out of all of the main cast, she is the most human-looking, and therefore would be the easiest to translate into different styles. Trying to figure out how each style might depict an anthropomorphic cat just sounded like more effort than it was worth. If you've seen my first video where I talk about Undying Bonds, has anyone even seen that video? I don't think so. Probably for the better, honestly. That video has only been out for a few months, and the information in it has already gotten a bit outdated with the new developments I've made. Well, on the off chance you have seen it, you may notice that Aurora looks a bit different. I've been refining the designs and lore, and cooking an absolute ton. I'll link that video in the cards if you're interested, but just know that certain things have been changed. I'll make an updated video talking about Undying Bonds again later, but I want to cook a bit more before I do. Also, thought it would be fun to play with fire. I figured it could be interesting to try to study how other styles render it, so I had Aurora using her magic here. The first style, that isn't my own, I did was Steven Universe. I just had to. Not only is it a staple found in many videos like this, but it's also just a damn good show that helped shape my childhood. I also figured it would be relatively simple, so it would be a good place to start since I've never done this challenge before. I referenced a lot of different characters to try and figure out how Aurora would look in this style. I gave her a very Pearl-esque pose, and mostly used older Steven as a reference for her body type, but I also referenced some other characters too. Steven Universe showcases a lot of different body types, and it's definitely something I'm working to improve in my own art. Her hair was somewhat tricky to figure out because it's a bit more of a complicated style, but I think I managed to make it look alright. It helped to take her front swoop things and exaggerate them to fit with the very round way Steven Universe hair typically is. Her shoes were probably the most difficult part though. Most characters have very simple shoes, so conveying Ori's heeled boots was hard. I referenced the various diamonds a lot, and just kinda winged it from there. Doing the line art made me realize how used to drawing with varied pen pressure I am. Steven Universe does have some line weight variation, but it's far more subtle than I'm used to using. I didn't trust myself to be able to handle that subtlety well, so I just limited myself to using a brush with no line weight variation whatsoever. And I think you can tell how out of my element I was with using that brush, because some of the lines ended up being pretty messy and choppy. The colors were simple enough though. I felt like the colors I used were pretty in line with the color palette of Steven Universe already. I added a little bit of fire as part of the study, and the way that Steven Universe tends to render fire is not that different from how I do it. Steven Universe doesn't really do shading except in scenes with explicitly dramatic lighting, but it just didn't look right to me to include an obvious source of light and not do any shading. So I did some very basic shading based on the reference image I used for the fire, and I think it worked out pretty well. All in all, I'm happy with how this turned out. It's not perfect, the lines could have stood to be cleaned up a little bit more, but it's really not bad for the first time ever drawing in this style. Next up is LavenderTowne. Out of all the artists I've picked out for this challenge, LavenderTowne probably has the deepest roots in my artistic growth. I would watch all her content as a kid, and especially loved the Do This Not That series. And LavenderTowne has such an iconic style, I just had to do it. Very early on, I discovered the hardest part about drawing styles from independent artists. They vary a lot. As in, the same artist's style can look quite different depending on where they are in their art journey, or what the specific purpose of the art is. For instance, LavenderTowne's YouTube style isn't exactly the same as her Unfamiliar style. They are both recognizable as being clearly made by the same person, of course, but there are more subtle differences in detail. I may have ended up combining different aspects based on what I personally thought would be interesting to do, so it may not be 100% accurate, but I had fun with it, so that's a win in my book. I used Planchette as a reference for Oriana, since I figured it would be the closest match for her body type. I made Oriana's hair a bit messier, with the little strands sticking out, because LavenderTowne's style tends to embrace those little imperfections. And I do picture Ori's hair getting messed up a lot in the story, despite her constant attempts to keep it pristine. So there is canon precedent for the messiness. My favorite part is probably the eyes, though. One of the most iconic parts of LavenderTowne's style is when she does fun things with the irises of her character's eyes, and I wanted to emulate that. Especially since this stylistic choice was a large source of inspiration for me making my Sona's bow change shape and color for the sake of expressiveness. I just felt like I should pay tribute to that. I used this 4-pointed star shape in various parts of Oriana's design, so I figured that'd be a good shape to use for her irises. I got to use a nice textured brush this time. I've actually been experimenting with more textured brushes recently, so it was fun to have an excuse to use it again. Unlike with the previous style, I did feel the need to adjust the color slightly, but only slightly. I just toned down the saturation of the orange to make it better match LavenderTowne's more desaturated pastel color schemes. Finding a reference for how LavenderTowne draws fire was a bit tricky, but I was able to find one I liked. However, while drawing this, I forgot that Oriana's fire isn't supposed to look like normal fire, and is instead supposed to be more yellow gold than red and orange. So I fixed that after recording. I love how this one looks. There is just something that feels so cozy and storybooky about LavenderTowne's style, and Oriana looks so cute in it. The next show style I replicated was the Owl House. Ah, the show that was taken from us too soon. This is another show I was obsessed with when I was younger, although it didn't air until I was a teenager, but that did not stop it from getting a stranglehold on me. In fact, it might actually have been one of the longest-lived hyperfixations of mine, beaten only by Ninjago. Fun fact, this show fixed how I draw noses. I used to just barely imply the presence of a nose because I hated drawing them. But then I became obsessed with Hunter, and my art has never been the same since. Because he has a very distinctive nose, and just doesn't look right without it. And if I'm drawing Hunter with a full nose, then at that point I may as well draw everyone else's noses. And then, even after I moved on from my Owl House hyperfixation, I continued to draw characters with actual noses. Honestly, the change was definitely for the better, since noses are such a good way to differentiate faces. When drawing Oriana in the style, I mostly used Willow as a reference, again because of her body type, but I also referenced other characters. Like I based Ori's eyes off of Lilith slightly, and I gave her like Luce's lip curl. And for once, I didn't struggle with drawing her shoes. The way that shoes are drawn in Owl House's style are very simple, but there is enough detail in them to work with, so giving Oriana her heeled boots was actually very easy. I was really worried about this one for a bit, because it just wasn't quite looking right to me for a while, but I stuck with it and continued to make adjustments. And it turned out looking really good actually. Now here's one that's a bit more unorthodox. I've never seen anyone include this specific style in any other videos like this. Have you ever watched Overly Sarcastic Productions? Let's be honest, they're a pretty large channel, you probably have. But how many of you know that Red makes a webcomic? I don't know, maybe that's common knowledge. But if you haven't, go check out her comic, Aurora. It's great. But OSP has always been a big inspiration for me. I began following them right as I was trying to get serious about improving my art and writing. So they were a massive influence on me. Well, Red was. I love Blue's content too, it just doesn't directly influence my work much. Red is a big reason why I love drawing characters with floofy hair. You'll be able to see that influence whenever I draw Oriana with her hair down, which admittedly won't happen too often because she's too prim and proper for that. Again, just like LavenderTowne, Red has different styles depending on the purpose of the art. Red is most well known for her YouTube art, which is very simple and minimalistic, while her comic has more definition and full color. But while I kinda blended LavenderTowne style variations together, for this, I specifically went for Red's Aurora style. Aurora has a very distinctive way the noses are drawn. Aurora also doesn't use much line art for depicting clothing folds and wrinkles, instead relying heavily on the shading to imply the folds. I forgot a couple things I added after finishing recording, like going on a small. Also, when I was first looking at references for how fire was drawn in Aurora, I noticed the tiny little flecks of fire around, and I thought that looked really cool. And then I completely forgot about it when actually drawing. Oops. I added those little details, plus fixed the shading a bit to cover areas I forgot about. I was really struggling to stay focused that day, so I kept making those little mistakes. But despite the ADHD fighting me the entire time, I like how this one turned out. The face especially was fun to do. Now for a very beloved classic, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I had to include this one. I mean, who doesn't love Avatar? It's a great show, and if you haven't seen it, you should. When drawing Oriana in this style, since I knew I was going to be drawing fire later, I gave her a pose akin to what firebenders might look like, since I thought that could help make the actual fire look more natural. The face proportions were a bit tricky to get right. The nose is very small, very anime-like, but the eyes were slightly smaller than I expected, with that anime influence in mind, and higher up on the face than I originally thought. And the ears are also pretty detailed, which you may notice I drew them as standard human ears. There aren't really any characters in Avatar that have pointy ears, so drawing them pointy would have looked out of place. That's definitely the only reason behind that very deliberate decision. It certainly wasn't because I was worried about how the ears had more detail in them than I'm used to drawing, so I ended up replicating my reference image so closely that I straight up forgot that this character that I created is supposed to have pointy ears. That'd be ridiculous, right? Besides, within my world building, Oriana is considered human. What is popularly known as elves are more of a subset of humans and a separate species entirely. More on that in the updated video I'll make for Undying Bonds eventually. So really, this was a completely intentional detail. We're just gonna ignore the fact that I didn't follow that same logic for the Steven Universe drawing. Despite that, to the best of my knowledge, there weren't any characters with pointed ears there either. It's fine, it's fine. I mean, forgetting details of your own character designs? That's just silly, no one does that. Anyway, where were we? Let's see, we've probably reached the coloring by now. I forgot Oriana's role again. Listen. I actually have a defense this time. As you may or may not have noticed with my own art style, if you're paying attention to the layers, I typically have two line art layers. One I refer to as hard line art, which stays black and is used for outlining general shapes, and one I refer to as soft line art, which will get colored in and is used for details. Normally I draw both line art layers over top of the sketch, before even touching the color. But in styles where that sort of detail don't really have line art, they are just flat color on top of color, I am no longer referring to my sketch layer, which you can see that I did remember Ori's mole then. I'm just not used to having to worry about the mole at that stage of the process, so it can be very easy to forget. I added it after finishing the recording, and I also noticed that Avatar seemed to have slightly more desaturated colors than my standard, just slightly, so I adjusted that as well. I had a lot of fun with this one. This is the style of GinjaNinja, aka June, and it is just so tasty. Like I mentioned in the Undying Bonds ramble video no one watched, June was a big inspiration for me starting this channel. Watching June's videos and getting attached to their characters made me want to do that too. And it proved that it's possible to get people invested in characters even without a finished story first, and get people interested in seeing the development process. I know this because I'm invested in their characters. Any new nuggets of Prism lore makes me go feral, and if this story can ever become a real tangible thing, I would be fucking ecstatic. I always get so excited whenever June posts, whether it be Prism related or not, because like, getting to see more of their delicious art, fuck yeah, gimme gimme gimme. So this was probably one of the styles I was most excited to do, but I was also dreading it for basically the same reason. This art style is so pleasing to look at, but would I be able to adequately replicate it? Spoiler alert, but I think I did pretty good if I do say so myself. That's not to say it was easy, of course. June is an absolute sketchbook fiend, and often works in pens, so they tend to be very confident in their lines, and it shows. I, however, am not, but I'm still happy with how it turned out. I didn't stress too hard about making all the lines super neat, because June's style can sometimes be a bit more on the messy side, and that's part of what makes it look so interesting. I especially like the way June draws hands. Namely, the fact that they sometimes just bullshit the hands and call it a day, which, as someone who struggles with drawing hands, I really appreciate. But it was during the coloring that things really started coming together. Whereas with previous styles, I either kept the colors the same as I would normally draw them, or I desaturated them slightly. With this style, I actually cranked the saturation up a bit. And the colored line art is what really makes this recognizable as June's style. I also slapped on some very quick shading, nothing too fancy, just enough to make it feel more complete. I also, for the life of me, could not find any references for fire in June's art style. Like, I spent a couple hours searching for any art that they might have done with fire in it, but I had no luck, and I had to actually sit down and work on the drawing if I wanted to be able to get this video out in time. So I just didn't draw Ori with a fire this time. But fire or no, I'm really happy with how this turned out. It just looks so good. Next up is Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Comparatively speaking, this is more of a recent influence of mine, since I got into it about 2 to 3 years ago. But despite that, Rise has impacted my life significantly. Not only is it the first fandom I ever wrote fanfiction for, and created an AU for, but by interacting with the fan community, I was able to find my people. I have made a whole online friend group with other Rise fans, and even though most of us have moved on to other interests, we're still very close and talk daily. Many of those friends act as the biggest fans of Undying Bonds, and them cheering me on is a big motivator for helping me push through the hard work in actually making this comic happen. So Rise may be a newcomer to my interests, but it more than deserves to be here. I know that opinions on Rise can be mixed because of how different the Turtles all look and act compared to previous iterations, but I just love the differences. Having characters all look the same way is boring, and if you never do anything experimental, then that's how you get formulaic storytelling. Drawing in this style was actually pretty easy. Because of how recent of an influence Rise is, some of the drawing habits I developed from it are actually pretty fresh in my mind. It usually isn't a great idea to immediately start with drawing the face when drawing full bodies, because it can make the rest of the drawing look out of proportion. But faces are also home to the most stylistic markers, so it acts as an easy place to start with this specific challenge. For example, the simpler face shape, the way mouths are drawn, and the solid black irises all come together to make this recognizably the Rise style. And once you get the face looking right, it's easy to judge whether the rest of the stylization is looking right. For instance, the hair in this show tends to be a bit more simple, so I took Oriana's more complex hairstyle and simplified it, removing the braids. And in general, I used a few more angular shapes, since I noticed that Rise has more pronounced shapes. The color is a bit darker and more saturated than my usual coloring style as well. I based the shading off of the movie, which had a higher budget and thus had more dramatic lighting. I thought the rim lighting was softer than it actually is. I probably should have kept it more cel shaded in retrospect, but the rest of the shading is cel shaded. I particularly like the solid black shading. In fact, I was having a bit too much fun with it, and ended up having to dial it back a bit. but I do really like how much it makes things pop. And there she is. She looks so sassy in the pose I gave her. And continuing the more recent influence train, we've got Castoff. Oh well, the general style of TheStarfishFace, who created Castoff, which to those unfamiliar is a webcomic, and one that I love. I found TheStarfishFace a few years ago, and found her videos on making webcomics very helpful. I didn't actually get around to reading Castoff until about a year after starting to watch her channel though. But despite that, Star has been a major influence on me in many different ways. From her videos on making webcomics, and her book, which I own, her own webcomic, and her character design videos, I just find myself getting so inspired by her art. I have taken stylistic attributes from Star and directly applied them to how I draw, like how Star draws animalistic ears. And if you've noticed me doing that little green thing to correct the colors, I learned how to do that from Star. For the drawing itself, you may notice that I pretty much copied the pose in one of Star's character illustrations. I admit that. I was just running out of ideas for poses. Easily the biggest indicator of Star's style is them big ol' eyes. I'm always torn between the desire to make my character's eyes look huge and expressive, or make them a bit smaller to give the other features room. But it was fun just saying fuck it and making them so big. That being said, in retrospect, I probably could have exaggerated them a little further. I originally did, but then I chickened out and scaled them down a smidge. The line art was fun though. Most of the other styles don't have as much emphasis on the line work, either to make them easier to animate or out of personal preference I guess. But I know Star loves very bold and thick line art. Sometimes I try to use more bold line art, but I always get worried about the details becoming lost in it. So studying Star's style and how to exaggerate features so they don't get buried in the line art is very useful. And something I may try doing again in the future. Again, I loved doing the black shading, which I actually think is part of the line art. I don't know, I did it on a different layer to make things easier for me to keep track of. But I love the classic comic booky feel it gives. And might actually be something I'll try to incorporate into my regular style. And not to sound like a broken record, but I love how this one turned out as well. It actually feels like I'm getting the hang of drawing in different styles. The last of the show styles is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. I was heavily influenced by anime growing up, and it is what got me into drawing humans after getting my start drawing My Little Pony. But while there are many anime I loved, Fullmetal Alchemist always stood out as my all-time favorite. Both animes, actually. While my personal preferences regarding tone lean towards favoring Brotherhood as my favorite, the 2003 anime is also very good. And also the manga. I just could not get enough of the story. To this day, I'm still drawing inspiration from Fullmetal Alchemist while writing Undying Bonds, so I just had to include it here. I drew Ori as though she had just snapped her fingers to create her fire, as a little reference to Roy Mustang. But let me just say, the past few art styles all came out looking so good that it lulled me into a false sense of security. I felt on top of the world, like I would be able to breeze through the last couple of styles. And whoo boy, did I pay for that hubris real quick. I'm gonna be real, I struggled with this one. I don't know what it was, I just felt like there was something off, but I couldn't place what. But I kept soldiering on, and was able to get the drawing to a place I was halfway satisfied with. That's the thing with art challenges, the entire point is to challenge you. And it's not really a challenge if success is guaranteed. I don't even hate this drawing, I just think it doesn't quite hit the mark of what I was going for. Maybe that's my own biased view, and from an outside perspective it looks fine, I don't know. But you know what, that's okay. Not every drawing can be winners, and beating yourself up for creating something you're dissatisfied with doesn't do you any good. Here's Oriana in the Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood style. Not my finest work, but it does the trick I think. And the last style I did was ABD Illustrates. ABD Illustrates, or Alex, is another YouTuber that was a big inspiration for me. Aside from just loving his art style, which I do, it's very yummy, Alex was also an inspiration for me to start this channel. I always loved watching Speedpaints, but I especially liked the ones as voiceovers. His Concept Corner series is one I've rewatched many times, and may even put on if I need familiar background noise to listen to while I do something. So when I wanted to start trying to share my characters, doing so through making speed paints just felt like the natural option. Especially since the subject of Concept Corner, Heartless, directly inspired a couple of aspects of Undying Bonds. All of the shows and artists featured in this challenge have, and some that aren't mentioned here. I just love collecting ideas taken from a wide range of sources and remixing them together with my own ideas into something that only I could have made. Because there is no such thing as a completely original idea. It's just the combination of concepts and how they are executed that makes ideas feel unique. But back to the actual drawing, I struggled a bit with this one, I'm not gonna lie, but I do think it turned out alright. For body type references, I mostly used Diana and Moira, two characters from Heartless. Alex has a very particular way of drawing noses, and I tried to replicate that, but I'm not sure I nailed it. I don't know, maybe I just psyched myself out from last style. I was getting pretty tired at this point. Coloring went pretty smoothly though. I used my usual colors, just adding a bit extra blush around the nose and cheeks, and a little highlight by the nose. The eyes were fun to do, as they usually are for me. White pupils look so cool on characters. I also added a gradient to Oriana's dress, since Alex utilizes gradients a lot. I probably could have used a couple gradients in other places, like in her hair, but I was worried about overdoing it. The fire was a bitch to do though, in part because Ori's fire isn't normal fire colored. Does what I drew actually look like fire? But it looks cool, so that's a win in my book. Didn't bother with shading this time, because it looks like the basic illustrations from the first few videos had very minimal shading. Also, I was tired, and I just wanted to be done. Which, I'm done. Here is Oriana in the style of ABD Illustrates. Actually, here, have all 10 drawings. This challenge is fun to do, even I struggled in some bits. Honestly, if I had taken the time to analyze each style, and draw a couple studies of each of them, I probably would have been able to hit the mark a little closer. But I wanted to be able to actually get this video out in March, and I'm also juggling other projects, so time is in limited supply. Admittedly, this video was mostly just an excuse to ramble about some of my inspirations, but also, it was a good exercise in stylization. I've been wanting to experiment more with simplifying my style, to make it easier and faster to draw, but also have that simplified style still fit the more dramatic and dark story beats I want to include in my comic. So really, this is just another step towards the production of Undying Bonds. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.